All right, we're live. Okay, back with episode 7.
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome. So we talked a little bit about organizing training. I think mostly from a like daily session, right? Exercise selection, exercise order, things like that. When I was listening back, I want to go back over one point, I think. So like Logan, you talked about um like how to quantify training and like in the weight room it's not easy but way easier than practice and things like that. But in order for it to work, they both have to be quantified, especially like in a sports setting. But like we talked about using time to quantify, but I don't know that that's possible either. And I only say that because like, if somebody says, hey, you got 10 minutes in the weight room, it's like, you can make that super, super hard or super easy. So then it's not a fair quantification. So I don't know. I think we should talk a little bit about that before we get more into like organizing annual plans, things like that.
Right. And I agree with you. I will say this though. So over the last few years, we've been really tracking like everything we do from a practice and then running standpoint. Not so much the weight room. The weight room's hard to quantify with, I don't know, with wearable tech, I guess, if you will.
Right.
I mean, you could use heart rate probably, but even then,
Like
if you're
in
doing
practice, you're saying.
no in the weight room.
Nice saying in the weight room use heart
But
rate.
but I mean, like your heart rates aren't necessarily going to get, I don't know,
Well, I think
pushed to
that the
a
weight room is fairly easy, not easy, but like once you train for a little while, you can get hey, we're doing sets of 5 at 65%. Okay, volume, whatever, volume's down. It's going to be fairly
right.
easy. Or vice versa. We have sets of 5, 5 sets of 3 at 90%. It's going to be much harder, whatever it is.
Right.
But I think
I
the
mean,
practice aspect is way harder to get a number on.
yeah. And so kind of more or less what I'm getting at is if the practice in general is run somewhat similar every time. So I'm not saying that like everything
Right.
in the practice is the same. We're not that you're doing the same drills or the same whatever, same stations, but like Nick can attest this, in football, you have, in football practice you've got it's broken up into sessions, right? As the practice goes on. Each session has a certain amount of time. Well, not every practice is the same, but there's a difference between like really really hard practice and really really easy practice. They have
Right.
they still have similar drills and similar concepts, and a lot of things are similar. So what we've done, like what I've done the last couple of years with our practices, is like we're tracking all of those, and then I'm looking at, okay, how hard is it, looking at like a player load or an external load that our wearable tech gives us. That's kind of telling me how hard the practice is, right? So usually what we see is like you fall within those bandwidth of time. So if the practice is 45 minutes long, well, our bandwidth is between 200 and 250. Okay. If our practice is 90 minutes long,
200 and 250 from the wearable thing.
From the wearable, and like, but those numbers are arbitrary. They don't mean anything to anybody. But anyways, so like, and then like a 90-minute practice, but a 90-minute practice can stem anywhere from 400 to 550, depending on what we're doing in that practice, how competitive it is, how much live play there is, that sort of thing, or if we're just in there doing drills or like a shoot around or something.
Right.
So, but if you're at 90 minutes, like if you go into 2 hours, well, if you go to 2 hours, you're going to be way above 400, like no matter what, every single time. That doesn't even fall within that bandwidth. Right. So kind of what I was getting at last time is like you can kind of guess on duration roughly how difficult the session is going to be,
depending, or assuming that practices run about the same each day.
Correct.
Right.
But you can also manipulate that session. You can say I have 90 minutes, but I want it to be very intense.
Right.
So I want to hit 550, but I only got 90 minutes to do it. Okay, so that practice has to be up pace or fast pace, competitive, explosive, lots of live play, right? Same
Right.
thing in the weight room. Okay. I have 1 hour in the weight room. All right. Well, this is my medium day, my high day, or my low day. Well, we adjust it with intensity or we adjust it with volume.
Right.
It's when you're doing the same thing at practice. What's the intensity of the drills? How many drills are there?
See, yeah,
Um,
this is what
you-
I've thought of before too, like with the drills, like whatever I don't know how it, I just think of like, okay, like individual skill work, live practice, whatever, but like finding some way to put like a variable to each type of drill, might be able to give you a guide of like, hey, today, like we need to take it a little easier. So you have to work down on your, down your list. Like if the hardest thing you can do is go live, it's got to be a couple steps down, and we're going to shorten it by time.
right. And so like how we organize all of our stuff is that every second is accounted for at practice. So every drill that we've done, I've kept a library, and then I've assigned more or less, I've assigned what I view that drill as. Like I feel it's like high from an intensity standpoint, high intensity, medium high, high medium, low, medium,
Right.
medium low, whatever. And then we also cross correlate that with like external load per minute. So like that, those numbers I was talking about earlier, we're talking about a 200 load. Well, how long did it take us to get to 200? Did it take us 90 minutes to get to 200, or did it take us 10 minutes to get to 200? So the intensity, obviously, the load per minute, the higher the load per minute is, then the more intense it is. And then we undulate weekly as we prepare for games as well. So like the furthest, so game day -3 is depending on how the weekend went, because we played on Saturday, Sunday we're off, so we're coming in on Monday. So Monday be game day -3. So depending on how the weekend went, will determine more or less what that Monday is going to look like. Is it going to be higher volume, more time? Like when I say that, I mean more time, or and maybe like a little less intense, or did we play, some D2 school or a scrimmage or something, and so we're going to have, it's going to be high volume and high intensity on that day. And then the next day, game day -2, maybe the volume would be high, but the intensity would be lower. Okay, because usually we're prepping for the next game, so it's a lot of scout, a lot of learning. And then game day -1, it's a low volume, so maybe we're in there for an hour 15, but the intensity is very high. Like you get hear coaches talk about Fast Friday. It's kind of the same idea. Like we're going to come in, we're going to be super concise, but it's going to be intense, and then we're going to play the next day. So that's how we do that. I think we're kind of getting into the weeds talking about practice.
Yeah, I don't want to do that.
Not necessarily the weight room, but that's how we do it.
Yeah. I think it's important to like, they got to work together, but I think it's hard at times to do that with practice, like, especially if it's random or like, they don't necessarily work like that, because your situation might be fairly unique. I think most people are probably reacting to what happens at practice or what they're told people think is going on at practice, and like they're scrambling and, whatever, especially in season, and it's not easy. But I think that helps to figure out like, yes, it's by time, but it's also by intensity, and it's not, it's not one or the other, but a combination of, and a, melding together of the two.
Yeah, and I would say that my situation is unique.
I talked for sure.
I talked to coach today, and he has practice already planned for the entire week.
Yeah, and that wasn't ever happening. It was always guessing and, going off of what people said. So it was never very accurate.
I mean, and there's obviously deviation day to day, depending on what we need to work on, or something we didn't get to something one day or something, whatever that might be. But yeah.
What do you think, Nick?
About which part?
Well, I don't know. I mean, obviously, like what in a sports setting, like what we do, especially like in season, is dictated to a point by practice, and how those two work together, or how you can get a gauge on how hard practice is, like, because again, like he talked about, they use technology. It's like, well, that, that's top 5%. Like most people don't have that stuff.
Right.
Well,
So I don't know if you thought anything else.
Well, and
Oh.
like, and this would, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Nick, but
Good.
they're again playing into that. Like, I'm using technology and I've found correlations with time,
Right.
with duration. So if you don't have technology, you can assume that if you have a 3-hour practice, it's going to be harder. It's
Right.
going to be more stressful from a physiological standpoint. It's going to be more stressful on the athlete than if you had an hour and a half practice, regardless of the intensity. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
In general.
In general.
Yeah.
So, because you have twice the time. You're doing twice as much stuff.
Right.
Right. Unless, I guess, I mean,
that's just cumulative load. Like it's just,
if you're practicing normal, somebody's going to come on here and say, well, what if you just go walk around for an hour or for 3 hours? Well,
you could very well do that.
I get it. But at the same time, you're not accomplishing anything either at practice. So, yes. But so if you don't have technology, this is another way to do that. You can also do it with RPE. You can use session duration, RPE. You're probably going to find a correlation between RPE and session duration somewhere in there. You can do wellness surveys. You can do all kinds of stuff. But anyways.
One angle that I was going to say, just to take a different approach, would be
good.
Logan talked about RPE, but if you've been at a place and you've developed a decent relationship with your athletes and you have a couple that you trust and you don't have any wearable tech, you don't have any of
right
those kind of bells and whistles, like you talk to those athletes that you trust and that work hard and put in the effort and probably get more reps at practice, and then you can talk to them and ask them like, hey, I was practice yesterday or today or whatever, whenever, depending when your lift is, whatever.
Right.
But kind of working that relationship as well after you've built that trust, because then you kind of have another line of communication there too, because it's not just hearing it from coach, and coach would be like, oh, we only practiced for 2 hours today, and then but I had them there 30 minutes early and we had to stay 15 minutes after. But then it could be a completely different story from the athletes, because those are two different realities that you're dealing with.
And one's usually delusional
when it comes to the same practice. So you can talk to the coach. Yeah, you should have a good relationship with your coach. But if you don't have any bells and whistles to monitor practice time, load, whatever it is, talking with the players can give you a good painting of the story as well.
Yeah, I think that's I agree too, because I think that, like, like if a coach might, like you said, if a coach might come up and say, hey, practice was super hard today, or it was really easy, and then like those kids you trust that work hard are going to give it to you straight, they're going to say it wasn't hard, like we're fine, because there was multiple times like they come off of practice and it's like, hey, Mike, it was really hard today, they're really tired, like we got to take it easy. It's like, all right, yep, you got it. And then when the kids get in there, they're like, no, we're fine. Okay, perfect. Like I'm going to listen to them.
Because you could have one kid, like for whatever reason, like going back to our injury episode, of like one little thing in their daily routine was off. So they go into practice and one drill just kicks their ass for some reason. The coach sees that person dogging it just because of this one drill, and then they think practice is harder because of what they see.
Right.
And everyone else was like, no, that was fine. So kind of just making sure you talk to everyone and what everyone's opinions are.
Right. Okay. Now I want to move into like annual plans in general now. It's like we talked about organizing days, but organizing days is only as good as what the overall plan says. It's like no matter how it's done, but like creating some sort of guideline of how you're going to approach the year, once you look at season schedule, what the time of year is, I just want to talk through like in general what the phases would look like, and from all three of us, they might be a little bit different, but what the phases would look like. And then like, within each phase, we don't need to necessarily talk about what exercises or movements we're doing, but we can talk through like what is trying to be accomplished in each, 4 to 8 to 12 week training block as you approach a season, as you go through it, and as you restart one after season.
I have an interesting caveat I want to ask about this topic. So one of you guys go first, and then I'll ask my question.
Sure. Well, yeah. So if I use like I think basketball's difficult to do it with just because their season's so long, and a lot of it depends on like the situation you're in, probably for training purposes. But like if you approach like a volleyball team, and let's say you're at a higher level school, or you're training kids at a private facility and their season is in the fall, but you have access to them from, January after season or December all the way through the next December. Like, I think you want to start off, like, depending on like a lot of factors go in, but like injury status and like previous training history. But, the first 4 to 8 weeks for sure I call it like an anatomical adaptation phase, but like, it's the same as like a hypertrophy or accumulation. I guess accumulation would be a better way to define it, but especially when you have like that long of an off season, I want to start with something to where, like, no matter what the training history is or where they're at coming off the season, something that starts fairly low volume. And like during the first, like I said, 4 to 8 to 12 weeks, the focus I think is really on getting like prepared to train and train heavy again. So starting light, but like through that process, we're not just, doing the same volumes, things like that. I'm trying to build volume back into the plan. So, like a lot of things talk through like really high volume plans, but I think there needs to be some preparation towards that volume too. So, an accumulation phase might be 4 weeks of going from 2 sets of 5 to 3 sets of 5 over the course of 4 weeks, or it might be going from 8s to 10s, or 3 sets of 5 to 4 sets of 5, but some sort of, I don't think there's a best way of doing it. I mean, there's obviously ways that are wrong, I think, but going through that first initial phase, that might be from February until May. That's your focus in that early off season, building volume. And then same on the court with sprinting and things like that, building volume, making sure you're preparing the body to handle load, which leads into like, the big phase 2, which is like your intensification or strength phase. And that's where you're going, that's where like the focus turns from building volume on your primary lifts and to trying to build strength. So whether that's, I would prefer like sets of 5, and we're trying to add load to sets of 5, but I'm not trying to drive the volume up necessarily week to week, if that makes sense. I'm trying to drive the load up now. So it just shifts from a focus on volume, and like load's always a focus, but volume to load. And then when you get closer to season, some sort of realization type phase where you're training strength, speed, or power, or speed, strength, however you want to categorize it. And then as the season goes on, you're kind of cycling through those phases again every, 4 to 6 weeks. But like when you think about it, a shorter season's only 10 to 12 weeks long, or whatever it might be. So those cycles are going to be pretty quick, but the training in season's only as good as the training in the off season. So as long as you had a good off season and are prepared, I think that is 70% of the battle usually. So I don't know. In general, that's kind of what I think it looks like. And I used to get real tied up into different teams, trying to change the plan, but it's like, well, not necessarily, just because the team is different, but all you're doing is shuffling around time of year and programming based on when the season is, how long it is, how much time you have with them, things like that. But as far as, like my philosophy or whatever it might be, it doesn't change based on the team necessarily. There might be some changes in like movements I select or whatever, but laying out the training is going to look very similar between sport A, B, and C that plays in the fall, spring, and summer, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's how I do it. I mean, do you read Periodization by Bompa or Science of Practice or Practical Programming or any of those? Like that's pretty much textbook. And like you said, there's a lot of different ways to do each phase. It's got to be, it doesn't necessarily have to be unique every single year, but it has to, in my opinion, it has to be able to fit the group of athletes you're training, whether that's a different sport or even just different group of kids. I mean, for example, here, last year, the way we trained last year is significantly different than the way we trained this year. But this year, our training age is much higher.
Right.
Our athletes are way more developed after a calendar year of training.
to interrupt that. So you said like the training's way different, but from a big perspective, are like the phases of training
No.
that much different? So that I think that's a
No.
good point to talk about too.
No, but where last year I'd say I was probably more linear in nature, and I probably pushed volume a little bit longer. This year I didn't. We moved to intensification a little faster. I did some more unique things with undulation, weekly undulation, or even within the set undulation, to kind of help us push intensity. Just because, I mean, I didn't have a bunch of guys trying to gain 10, 15 pounds, you know, in an off season. We were about where we needed to be from a body weight and a body comp standpoint. And like I said, our training age is much higher. We were much stronger to begin with. So even the frequency at which we trained, you know, last year at this time, we were still going 4 days a week. Well, this year we went 3, and we put a little bit more emphasis on basketball. So, you know, it's got to be specific to your group.
Right. And like when you say linear, so to define linear, you know, it can look a whole bunch of different ways, but that means volume starts high, intensity starts low, and then over the course of the off season, whether that's, 10, 20 weeks, those things just start to inverse. So they progress to low volume to high intensity, which is the simplest. But like he said, going with a novice or like a beginning type trainee, they need that slow build up to heavyweight just because they've never trained like that before. So it's, that's the best and the easiest way to get the adaptation you're looking for is a simple volume intensity flip as it progresses.
Yeah, I mean, last year after our introductory phase, which is 4 weeks, where guys were learning how to learning how to press, learning how to pull, learning how to squat. We're introducing Olympic lifts. I wouldn't say that we were even really very good at those after 10 weeks, but we were starting to introduce all that stuff. We probably did working maxes every week, every other week, because of our training age, it was so low. Our athletes were so novice, and not all of them, but 80% of them were. So
right. They were depending on what, or based on what you wanted them to do too.
Yeah, they were hitting. I mean, they were reaching new strength milestones every Friday.
Right.
Just from compensating over the week. So that's how I did it. That's how I did it for that group. Now, where this group, it's completely different.
Right.
So.
What do you think, Nick?
A couple of things I was going to say is, like, when it comes to an annual plan, I don't think I've actually ever planned out like an entire year. Just from the mere fact that like things change all the time. But I do, so like you mentioned off season and preparing for like the season and like maybe going through the season. But like I've never actually went through and done a whole annual plan for off season, preseason, in season, postseason, back to off season. Like I've never actually planned that whole thing out. Just because when I'm getting into programming for any team or athlete, I take it one phase at a time, and like I might come in with, and like sometimes I get thrown like kids I don't know what they can do, so I have to go super basic and build up the accumulation block, kind of how you were talking. Like that's what I'll do in the off season as well. But like sometimes I'm like, okay, we'll do these things, like, but then they don't know how to do anything, and I have to completely scrap anything that I have written. So for me, it's like I don't want to spend a whole lot of time like trying to plan out a year. I have a picture in my head, but I never actually plan it. And then for me as well, it's like you guys talked about linear programming and all of the different things you can do to achieve whatever adaptation you want. Sometimes when I sit there and think about it, just to try to simplify it, whatever I'm trying to get to, if you span out enough, like if you back up, anything you're gonna do is going to be linear for whatever adaptation that you're going to try to achieve. So So you don't think so?
What do you mean? What does that mean?
So like, what are you trying to achieve? Like, do you want someone to get stronger? Well, they're going to start down here. And as they keep going, like they're going to get stronger, and it's linearly going to go up if you back out enough. Same thing with power, same thing with speed, same thing with any adaptation you're trying to look at. Like if you, as soon as you start zooming in, you might see those undulations, those dips, those deloads, whatever you want to talk about. But if you're going from a far enough scope out, like everything's going to be linear. Like I want them to be able to produce more force. Like I'm going to do all the different things I can within that, whether it's what you guys described as linear programming, weekly undulation, daily undulation, all the different kinds of programming you can do. For me, high school athletes, they'll respond to linear because their training age isn't high and they're novice athletes in the training space. But I just take a look of kind of the same as you. I go super basic textbook, like you're going to accumulate volume. We're going to build that up. Then we're going to transfer that volume and try to build up some strength. From strength, I'm going to go into some power. And then I kind of might back off and reset a little bit once the season starts, just so through the season you build back up. And that way you're kind of peaking in the spot that you want to peak at. So your power production is the highest, nice and snappy. Your CNS is doing what it's supposed to be doing at the right time. But I just kind of wanted to visit how I look at kind of planning it out without actually wasting time, because that might completely change based on other variables.
Yeah, see, and I would not argue, but I think like early on I was resistant to like writing out an annual plan, but I think that for me was super helpful. Like I would put them in the computer eventually, but I wouldn't start with like a super in-depth computer plan. But I always like to write out like, like if it was basketball, okay, like season got done in March, we took our time off. So then I would start like my annual plan would be, I would write out, like I'd have a column of Monday dates, and then I'd have, you know, what the focus would be, and then any like planned times off. But I think having that in like my notebook, just being able to see like, okay, here are all my Mondays, like all the weeks, and then all of the phases that I would like to see, and then all of the special circumstances of like, school's out or vacations or like they're at home. Like I think that helped me have like a fluid plan. That way I had something to adjust, like, because like you said, you don't necessarily write it out, but you have it in your head of what you're going to, or what you're planning to do, right?
Yeah.
But I think for me especially, is just having that thing written out like by hand forced me to like think a little bit bigger, not even with the training really, but just to make sure like I didn't get to a week where I was planning to test out, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that was Labor Day and we don't even train on that Monday. So like I whiffed it, but I could have solved that like back in February, like as I write out the year. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you're
But
saying.
I think there's some value, like, like obviously there's a lot of changes and stuff, but I do think there's some value in starting with the plan, and then you can have that, but it's obviously fluid to a certain extent, but then you can adjust it as you go, if that makes sense.
Yeah, mine's I plan out an entire year, and I've done basketball now for several years, so it's pretty, second nature to plan out the year and know when your important dates are. Like we're always going to start 20-hour weeks the last week of September. We're always our first game's always going to be the first week of November. We're
Right.
We've always got 4 days off over Christmas. We're always traveling somewhere for a big tournament over Thanksgiving. Like, so you kind of where all those things lie, and it is very fluid. There are a lot of variables that go into it that you try to take into account, but there's always something that messes something up.
You have to be careful too, I think, with that. Like I notice the same thing. It's like you get into the rhythm of like, oh yeah, I know, whatever. Here's my time periods, blah, blah, blah. But then I always felt like it was easy for me to like kind of not neglect it, but like to let it just be like the same, without like thinking through it. Cause when the stuff is. it's like I always try to be careful of like, okay, never mind, like, like start it over, map it out, and just because I did like this last year, I don't want to just do it again. Like I just think it's easy. Like the routine is real powerful, but it's
Mhm.
also easy to like maybe overlook something or something like that. I don't know, just to throw that in.
Yeah, no, and like, don't get me wrong. I sit down and I'm pretty detailed about
Oh yeah, I know.
about everything, and I try not to refer back to what I did the year before, but I do. But you do kind of have
Oh
that
yeah,
that
yeah.
rhythm. Um,
Because it's an advantage, like it's an advantage
mhm,
to be able to look back at what you did and like,
yeah, but I think too, and maybe it's just my train of thought, and like I said, it is very fluid, and my my phases do adjust, and they adjust a lot based on how we performed the previous phase, like Nick said.
right.
But in college athletics versus high school or private, you've got a little bit more routine, so it's a little bit easier to maintain all that stuff. But my thought process, like I have this plan in June or whatever, well before that April, and I had planned it out for the year, but by the time I get to August, I'm like, okay, now I was thinking about this and I have all this stuff written down, but what about this? So like maybe there's something that I maybe didn't take into account when I was putting it together the first time. I was like, that might be better, or no, that was really stupid. Like I'm definitely going to do this other.
Yeah.
So that's kind of that's the reason why I to this day still make an annual plan every single year, to map out the entire year. But
Well, I think,
um,
like you said too, like with the, your new or your kids last year, whatever it might be, like it's good to have that plan, but it's also like you're not stuck to that plan because, like, let's say, like your first 2 weeks, you're teaching Olympic lifts, or you have, you have to teach the warm up and the running and the whatever, and then you don't get to certain things. Like, well, if I didn't get to my third block, or I had to cut it short or whatever, well, I'm not going to progress based on what my annual plan says just because it says it. Like I was just talking about to somebody about this last week. It's like, well, if we didn't get to it, I can't progress from doing A exercise to B just because that's what I have written down. Like that's where it becomes like a real like art type balancing act of like, well, I didn't do this, but my plan says I have to go from, you know, dumbbell RDL to barbell RDL. It's like, well, but I didn't do it. Like, or I missed a week, or I had to cut it short, or whatever. Like, I think it's important. Like, yeah, have that mapped out, but it's like, but you better know how to adjust it. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble.
yeah, and then all with the phases, you guys talked about all your phases. My phases are exactly the same. I want to be as strong and as powerful as I could possibly be right before the season starts. Um, I obviously want to build into that accordingly. Within the in season, I focus way more on power and speed and less on strength, just because you can maintain strength a lot longer.
Mhm.
That's in books, so you can read that. I didn't just make that up. Um, so you can maintain strength longer. Not that we don't touch it, because we do, but I spend more time going back and forth between power and speed in season, and then I do my in season pretty. I wouldn't say it's unique, but it's probably, like I said, I have a coaching staff that's very, very open to training and understands training. So when I bring new ideas to them, they're accepting, right? So we train several days a week in season, where you'd see normal basketball programs, or a lot of basketball, I shouldn't say normal, but a lot of basketball programs, meaning they train once or twice a week. We train 4.
Right.
So, but then how I organize that is conducive to make sure the guys are prepared to play. But my caveat. So if you guys listen to Cal Dietz talk about any of his profiling, athlete profiling,
Yeah.
so kind of if you listen to, I'm sure there's YouTube videos of it, or he's got a podcast, I think, or I saw an NSCA presentation about it. And then he's got a website too. I think it's
Excel athlete.
no, it's not Excel Athlete. There's another one. I'll find it. I'll find it and then just put it when you post this one. Put it in the
Yeah.
in the link. But you can go on there and do like a sprint profile, right? So you do a 20-yard sprint and you do a 10-yard split and then a 20-yard split, and then you can plug that in to a formula to look at, you know, where the athlete falls in the spectrum of like weaknesses. Where are they strength dependent? Are they speed dependent? Are they power dependent? And then then your training would follow along accordingly. It's very similar to like JB Moran's sprint profiling. I'm not sure what Cal's equation is, but he made it very simple on the website. And so I've been playing around with that, and we also have been using like a mid-thigh pull and the squat jump for the unforced plate to do the same thing, kind of plot the guys. What we've done it several times, and we're kind of plotting them over time, and it's not as cut and dry as you would think. You know, as what it's not as easy as you think, anyways. But the idea behind that type of periodization of that type of planning is that the athlete would test, and let's say you tested on the strength side of the spectrum. So more or less, you're dependent upon strength, or you're dependent on force production to perform a task, versus elasticity or like power or speed. So you would then train power and speed within the intensity spectrums, within the volume, durations, that's all that stuff. So you train in that area, and then you retest again. And maybe you'd switch. Maybe you would move to, hey, now I'm more elastic dependent. You know, maybe it's a 2-week block. That my guessing is it doesn't happen like that quite as often as you think, but then you would switch over to the strength side. Now you can train strength for 2 weeks, and then maybe you would do it, and then, well, now your endurance is shit. So now you're going to go back. You're going to go back even further, and you're going to train volume, right? So where we kind of lay out blocks, where it's like hypertrophy or accumulation, and then we're working on strength or max strength, and then we're working on power, and then we're working on speed or strength power or power speed, or however, whatever combination of those you want, and work on them in 4-week blocks or 6-week blocks or 8-week blocks, whatever we need. Where this thought process is saying, no, you're flipping those all the time.
So if somebody is like a strength-based athlete, saying that you train strength, or you train
power,
the weakness.
Train the weakness. You train power and speed.
You train the bigger of the weaknesses, or the one that would be like next sequence?
You train within that spectrum. So I think how Cal's got it set up, and I kind of like how he organized it, because he used triphasic obviously to organize it, because that's his big deal, right? But I think there was like 12 zones or 16 zones, you know, where like strength falls in you know, four zones, right? So you could span across those 4 zones. Let's say you stay in that strength when you're testing your 10-20, you stay in that strength period for a significant period of time. Well, you got 4 zones of training in there that you could utilize. Same thing on the other end of the spectrum. But if you're flip-flopping around back and forth, which, like, again,
Yeah.
I don't know how often that would actually happen. I know he said when he explained it, the athletes would come in, they test it every week. So they come in, they test, and they'd get their program, and they'd run that program for that week. They come in the next week and they test, and then they get the program. And he has all the zones. He has, you know, and he has all the zones broken down, and
Right.
you know, you fell into those areas. So I've been playing with it, doing a lot of testing. I haven't done any programming that way.
I don't know. Like I think, because obviously this would be like for a fairly advanced athlete, right?
Well, no, because you could bring in a novice athlete.
It'd be whatever their natural tendency is.
You could bring in a novice athlete and test them. You're probably going to see them fall. So this is what I've seen so far. All my freshmen, they already fall on the strength, or on the power spectrum. So they need strength, right? They're depending on elasticity to produce force, not strength, right? And so then when we So we train that area. Well, they might stay there for a long time, long time. And so, you know, they'd probably follow a very structured and normal block periodization. And so, but you might also see like a very seasoned athlete, somebody who's got a high training age, maybe they're there in their 5th year or 4th year, and they might start out strength, like they need strength, and then they might flip the next week into power and then into speed, and they might stay there for a while and they might flip back. So where instead of us spending a bunch of time in the strength block that for that particular athlete, maybe they only need a week. They just need to touch it up and then we're moving on. So it's a way to be more individualized with your periodization.
Yeah. Yeah. See, like, I think like when the, I think that's where like the power of like a concurrent style programming comes in too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not the same because I think like that is very block style, which is what it is, but I don't like it. So like I get like nervous with that sort of thing, like getting away from something completely and then going to something else and then going back and then going back, but I don't know. I haven't looked into it too much to like have a good opinion about it.
Yeah. And like I said, I haven't prescribed anything yet. It's all just been, I've more or less been collecting information, being like, okay, so where do we fall? Are we switching around a lot? Are the guys, if I personally think a guy is not strong enough, what does their profile say?
Right.
And I actually had that with one of our athletes. I felt that in order for him to be a better basketball player, he needed more strength and more size. Well, his profile said that that's what he utilized the most was strength with, to produce force, versus elasticity. So he needed to be more explosive to be on the power speed spectrum.
Right.
But I didn't necessarily think that from a coach. As a coach, I didn't think that. So, I took a step back and I was like, okay, so is my coach's eye wrong on this, or is that right? Do I need to be? Is that where he needs to train?
Right. Yeah, and that's not easy to figure out.
No, but I think I don't know. As the athletes get more advanced, I think that's the road you go down. Is it's got to be a little bit more specialized, and I've got a guy. I had him. With the first year I had him, he was a redshirt freshman, or sorry, a redshirt sophomore. So he transferred, so he had to redshirt again.
Yeah.
All right. Well, he was pretty weak. The school he trained at before, or was at before, he didn't lift weights. They didn't lift weights. If they were the appropriate size and body composition, they did no weight training. All they did was mobility, basically, and speed stuff. Okay. So he really hadn't done a ton of training. So I felt like he was very, very weak. His body composition was pretty bad. But it was his redshirt year, so we spent the entire year training, right? Improved his body composition by like 8% or something ridiculous. His total body mass dropped significantly, I think like 20 pounds. But his strength levels went up significantly as well. But still not, it wasn't like astronomical. It wasn't like he was a 400-pound squatter and a 350 bencher, or 450 squatter and a 350 bencher.
Yeah.
That's not what he was, but he was significantly stronger. But then over the next 2 years, he hit those numbers. Well, now here we are in his last season, and he was a 400-pound squatter, or 425. He benches 305. Well, okay, is he going to be a better basketball player if he squats 500?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No, he's not. Is he a better basketball player if he benches 330? No, he's not. So for me to sit back and program his training in a way for him to hit those numbers, well, we had to spend a ton of time like strength blocks, and making sure that his endurance was high enough to handle those loads and those volumes to
Yeah.
get him to those numbers, right? So do I think he needs that? No. What I think he needs to be quicker off the ground. He's got his first step quickness needs to improve. His lateral quickness needs to improve. His ability to jump off 1 foot and 2 feet need to improve. So, I
And he can't
personalized
lose
it.
those numbers.
And he can't lose those numbers.
Yeah.
So I trained him differently this whole last year. I brought his training maxes way down. So when we were training, he was training in more of a power intensity spectrum. I specialized his plyometrics. And then when we go to test at the end of the summer, puts 10 pounds on his squat. He goes from benching or
Right.
squatting 405 to 415.
Yeah.
He puts 5 pounds on his bench, going from bench 300 to 305. So he got stronger,
Right. Because he got
pure-
faster. Yeah.
pure strength improved, but also his ability to jump is better. His quickness is better. His force plate numbers, his RSA mod is better. His
Yeah.
integrated force development is better. So all those things improved, and I didn't touch strength.
Or you didn't try to drive strength
I
higher.
didn't try to drive it higher. So my thing.
But that comes back to like, I think that comes back to like, if you were doing like dynamic work or whatever you did, like remember we talked a while ago about, like you have to be fast enough to make lifts too, like in the lift.
Yeah.
So like, that's like the whole method behind, not the whole thing, but it's like, that's a primary benefit of the West Side conjugate system where you train like a max day and a dynamic day. So like they're training the speed of the lift. So, like some people, like they would talk about, some people can make the lift because they're super strong and they can grind through it. Others can make the lift because they're fast enough to move the weight up. So it's like, as the, like the load goes up, the speed goes up, and they keep building on each other. And it's like, you might have not focused on getting his bench to 310, but you might have done more like sub-maximal speed style training on the bench or the back squat, whatever it might be. And then that boosted his numbers up because he maybe never did that before. Or maybe it was some sort of carryover effect from, I don't know, like some jumping or whatever it might be.
Right. But if I would have, but my argument then, the reason why that type, like Cal's thought process intrigues me is because, that's kind of my thought process. I just never really had anything to coin on top of it.
Yeah.
But if I would have trained him down with my freshmen, am I not at like doing a lower level program where we were really blocking it out? Would he have gotten a lot better? Would those things have improved? And I argue the same thing on the other end. So we brought in a freshman this last year, and I felt like from day one, I was like, this guy is pretty developed. Like you can just look at him and tell, like you're pretty strong already, you're pretty explosive already, you're really coordinated, like but your training age is low. You hadn't really done any training. A lot of this is just natural. But I kept him on developmental program because he needs to learn how to lift. Like that's also important.
Yes.
But
and I think people do that. They move away from that stuff. And I think that's why I always cling to like the traditional big lifts, strength training, because I think number one, they don't know how to lift, and everybody thinks that they need to jump into like the stuff you're talking about. That's like years down the line, Yeah. But I think people jump to that too quick, and then it's like they're doing a bunch of random stuff that they think is good, but it's like, well, but they don't even know what they're doing, like.
Yeah, and those of you listening, don't get me wrong. Like the guy I was just talking about previously, he's in his 6th season of college.
Yeah.
Athletics.
Well, yeah,
and he's redshirted twice, so his training age is super high. So doing that more advanced stuff, that was right up his alley. But this other guy that I bring in as a freshman, anyway. So we do all of our developmental stuff again. I feel like he needs to learn how to lift, and he did. Don't get me wrong, but the improvements he made compared to the other freshmen were minuscule. All the freshmen are putting 3-4 inches on their vertical,
right?
Putting 40-50 pounds on their squat. He didn't do that
because he's already fairly strong.
So I never gave him I wasn't giving him a high enough stimulus to push those types of numbers that way.
Right.
And so but I mean, he got better. He's a better lifter. I mean, he's much more efficient at Olympic lifts, much more efficient at everything else. And I think,
or the stimulus might have been too much. Like it might have been too frequent, like that's the thing with the new kid. It's like you can train more like you're going to squat and bench, whatever, 3 days a week because they can recover within 24, 48. But as the loads get higher, it's harder. So it beats them down more.
That's very possible too. That's very possible too. So anyways, that's the other end of the spectrum that I kind of wanted to bring up with the annual plan thing.
Yeah. And I think it's important too that, like people understand the difference between like you said, it's like your situation is pretty unique, like work with basketball, like you have, like some in a different scenario, like it might not be possible to do that sort of thing, even if you almost need to, like if you're at a high school or like a college where you're training like 8 teams, it's like, well, how specialized can you even afford to get outside of the 12 hours a day? Like that, like, cause it's like, it's not, like you said, there's benefits to each. And it's like, for some of the kids who might be more advanced, it doesn't help them to be down with the lower group and et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I think those things are important to keep in mind, especially as kids stay within the program and train consistently under what you want them to do.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that does a good job of organizing training. I think what we'll talk about next time is like squat technique principles and just laying out, like we talked the first episode about like low bar squatting, and that obviously has its own, different principles. But I think we can talk through like some universal things that people should look for, and then maybe some special cases or like modifications for limitations and things like that.
That website is Coaching Made Simple.
Coachingmadesimple.com.
I'm pretty sure.
Okay. I'll find it and put it in the comment or the description.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why there's 1,000 books written about this. And you can go back and look at Soviet Union literature from whatever, like and it's all talking about periodization, how to lay out. I mean, we can just talk about this forever and ever and ever.
I know. Yeah, that's the problem.
So it's hard to, in one episode, it's hard to like bring it all together. But at the same time, like we're giving you an inside perspective of how we think, how we done it.
Well, and I think that is the main point. And that's how we can wrap this up. It's like, like when we talked about like the annual plan and I kind of butted in about having the plan, I think it's important, like, like no matter if me and you have the exact same annual plan philosophy or thought process, or it's totally opposite, the key point is that we both have a way we would do it. Like if somebody walks up to me and says, "Hey, Mike, I need you to train me for 3 years," I could write it out in 2 hours, what I would be thinking, and it will change, but having the plan is 95% of the battle, because so many don't have that. And then that's where they're lost. And, like I love how Dan John talks about this stuff. Like he's not a big believer in like peaking and things like that, but it's like any plan is better than no plan. Like, the worst plan in the world. Like I'd rather have somebody give me a year annual plan that I think is absolutely horrible, but at least they have a plan, because it's like you can work with the plan. You can't work off of nothing.
Yeah. And when you talk about like peaking and stuff, well, I think that concept is cool, but like peaking really,
sure.
What sports are you going to peak with? Track, maybe
swimming.
I mean, where you can
stopwatch sports,
where you can actually plan periodization or plan training, and it should directly correlate to whatever they're doing in the pool or on the track.
Right.
Like you can't do that with soccer.
Well,
like
and same,
you can't say we're peaking for this game for soccer. I mean, you could try, but there's so many other things. There's so many moving parts.
And you talked about like,
really
you can look in literature and things. It's like, where did peaking originate? Olympic lifting. It's like, so you take somebody who's training for 4 years for one event. Like, well, yeah, like you kind of want to make sure that you're at your best, that you're capable of at that time. But anything else, like my training, do I write to peak at? No. Like if I have a team, like a team sport, like football, there's no peaking in football. Like, it's like, yeah, you want to do your best to make sure you don't destroy them before the game, or you don't destroy, but it's like, you're not trying to peak. You can't peak every week for 12 weeks or 14
No.
weeks.
And
It doesn't work.
And what I think that there is what I call strategic periodization. It's
Right.
more like, okay, what does our opponent look like? What is, what are our break periods look like? What are our off days look like? How many
Right.
games in a week? How many games?
When's
a
the
week
bye
do we
week?
have?
Yeah.
When's the bye week? Okay, so we can train this way to hopefully either push us through, or maybe we need a little break here or something. It's just more like planning, trying to plan each week.
Well, it's planning when you can. I mean, we talked about this right away. It's like that is planning when you can push the gas pedal or when you need to slow down a little bit. Like, okay, we have a bye week. I can ramp things up a little bit within reason, but it's like, it's all part of the plan. It's all based on what you did in the off season, et cetera, So yeah, let's wrap up here. And then next time we'll talk about squat technique. All right. Thanks, everybody.